got it?
Yes, sir.
All right. So breeding warm temperature tolerant Leucospermum cultivars for Hawaii growers. Oh, shoots. I meant to start with a quiz, and I was going to ask you to tell me what is the most important proteaceae plant in the proteaceae family to Hawaii agriculture, and I jumped the gun on that. It's macadamia. Okay, some of you know, and maybe some of you don't know, that macadamia is in the family Proteaceae. It's Australian. I'm going to show you just examples of some different other genera in the Proteaceae family that are among the ornamental genera and the genus Protea. And this is an example. Protea cineroides, the king Protea, is one grown by Hawaii growers. There are many other Protea species, and Grevillea is another one. I point this out with hummingbirds. That's the natural pollinator for most Proteaceae is hummingbirds. We don't have hummingbirds in Hawaii, and accordingly, they seldom are pollinated. So there's very little natural seed production, and which means that it's unlikely that Protea will become invasive in Hawaii. So many ornamental introductions end up becoming invasive, and they're in the forest, they crowd out native plants, and they become a problem. I think there's very little risk for most Protea to become invasive. I have seen Grevillea, particularly Grevillea banksii, in the forest in Hawaii, but not very common. Protea magnifica, it's another member of species in the genus Protea. Banksia is an Australian genus. There are several species, and they're grown by Hawaii growers. And there's Leucodendron, another group. I didn't show any. And then the other primary and probably the most important genus among the ornamental Proteaceae is Leucospermum, and we will spend the rest of the time talking about Leucospermum. So back in about 1990, growers on Maui asked me if I'd be interested in doing some work with variety development with Protea. And I said I'd love to. And so we met a couple of different occasions to establish the criteria. What are we going to breed for? And they said, well, we want it to be an export crop. Our markets, we sell locally, but we want the main market to be the West Coast. And so it's we're going to have to air freight these over there. And the varieties that they had introduced by Dr. Phil Parvin originally, and some other growers, they had large leaves, they had very heavy stems, and they were just heavy flowers. And the freight charge was largely for the weight of the stems and leaves. So they wanted plants with long, slender stems and smaller hairless leaves. Well, I put that part in, the hairless leaves, because it was a foliar disease management strategy. Hairiness, tomentose, hairiness, fuzzy, whatever you want to call it, attracts moisture and slows the drying process. And so if you have hairy leaves, your leaves are wetter longer. And when you have leaves wet for several hours, that gives fungal spores an opportunity to germinate and infect. So quick drying is something that's just a kind of a non-chemical management strategy for foliar diseases. Long flowering season, they wanted new colors and combinations, high yields. For disease resistance, they wanted probably the biggest problem with Leucospermum is Phytophthora root rot. Plants can just suddenly die. It's not that they suddenly got infected. They were infected over a period of time, and it becomes a threshold where the plant can't tolerate the infection anymore and they die. And almost every grower has experienced that. So we thought, okay, well, if we can find some resistance in some of the species or wherever, we will see if it's heritable and try to breed for that. Elsinore stem scab was another disease that was important to them, and Dreschler. Now, there are two more that I should have listed here, but I didn't. And the reason is that we made good progress on all of these things, except there's two others. One was Cylindrocladium root rot. which is a significant problem, causes plant death, and root knot nematode. And we searched the species and some of the early hybrids from the South Africans, and we could not find any resistance or tolerance to either root knot nematode or cylindrocladium root rot. So we had we couldn't establish any breeding program for those criteria because we had no material to work with. Okay, so where does the material come from? There are 49 species of Leucospermum. They are, almost all of them are from South Africa. They fall into 9 different taxonomic sections. A section is an intermediate taxa between the species, between the genus and the species. And I'll talk more about that later. And the climate that they are found natively in, rainfall 16 to 40 inches, soil is usually porous and well drained, temperatures 52 to 70. It's very similar to coastal California, from San Diego all the way up to San Francisco. So it's cold. It's not the conditions that you have in Hawaii. That's why in Hawaii the plants have to be grown at between 2,500, in most areas, between 2,500 and 4,000 feet. You'll find suitable conditions for Leucospermum. So with that criteria, we started the program. This just shows simple pollination, a transfer of pollen from one plant to another, one flower to another. You identify, using a label, identify the parents. We bagged them. It may not have been necessary, but we didn't want to take a chance on any foreign pollen getting on our flowers that we were using as female, the receptive ones. Like I mentioned earlier, we don't have hummingbirds. Bees generally are uninterested in Leucospermum, and but it was possible to have some insect pollination. We wanted to avoid that, so we bagged them. Let a couple months go by, and they take the old flowers, extract the seeds. We treated the seeds to try to promote rapid germination and uniform germination. We scarified them in sulfuric acid, soaked them in a cocktail of benzyladenine and gibberellic acid, and that was very helpful in promoting germination. Then they're grown in the nursery for several months before they're put into containers and grown to a size suitable for field planting. So that's the basic, typical, similar to hundreds of other ornamental crop plants. So let's talk a bit about the characteristics of different species and how we utilize those in the hybrids. So on the left, we have a Leucospermum glabrum, or a hybrid with glabrum, showing the size of the leaves that was typical for some of the African material. In the lower left, we have a Conocarpodendron hybrid with typical large leaves that are really fuzzy. And plants with these kinds of leaves, large, fuzzy, abundant leaves, air doesn't travel through the plant rapidly, so the plants stay wet. For, I mean, if you overhead irrigate or just have natural, rainfall, it'll take much longer for these plants to dry than it would for something like, say, Leucospermum lineare, which is shown on the right. Lineare is an interesting plant. It's got almost needle-like foliage, dries off very quickly. It's very slick, doesn't have any hair on it, no tomentose. Stems are narrow, almost not much bigger than a typical #2 pencil, and long, straight, and strong. So, but we didn't know if these characteristics were heritable or not.
Question, Ken.
Yes.
How long did it take for germination? And this was a couple minutes ago, this question was asked.
For seed germination?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, for seed germination.
Using, I think germination takes I have here 2 to 3 months, but that's after using the sulfuric acid scarification treatment and the promelin benzyladenine gerbilic acid cocktail, which promotes germination. Without using those, it can take 6 to 12 months. And germination is very sporadic. And you have a seedling tray on your bench, and you can get a seedling this week, and then 2 weeks later, another seedling will come up, and it's very sporadic and irregular. So we recommend using this treatment down here. Sulfuric acid, 6 minutes, 24-hour soak in 200 parts per million. Bromelain, that's the commercial name for a cocktail that is benzyladenine and gibberellic acid.
Great.
I don't mind, Russ, if you make this presentation available to anyone who wants it.
Okay.
And then this information will be there.
So we're recording it and it'll be sent to everybody.
Oh, okay, very good.
Thanks.
And then even 10 to 60% germination. We thought that if we got 50%, we were absolutely pleased with 50% germination, because it's just not the quickest or easiest seed to work with. So back to lineary, we use that in many crosses, and during the first 2 years, we use a lot of species, lineary and saxosum, formosum, a number of different species that we'll be talking about as we get through this, to determine if the characteristics associated with the species that we're interested in, leaf characteristics, stem characteristics, disease tolerance, etc., if they're heritable. You have to know if the characteristic is heritable in order to really develop any kind of meaningful breeding program. Okay, the leaf and stem characteristics of lineary are heritable, or what would you say, codominant. You don't get the same needle-like foliage, but you get much reduced leaf size when you have lineary as one parent. And here's some examples. Hybrid 115 is one of my favorite. You can see through the plant, right? So air can flow through that plant very easily, and it dries off quickly, and you seldom have foliar disease problems, which allows growers to cultivate these plants and not have to spray for foliar diseases. And a couple on the left, 140, and I have some kind of bar here that's not allowing me to see some of the information on my slides. So I don't know what the unnamed one at the bottom is, what number it is.
It's 175, Ken.
175, okay. Culling has to be very, very rigorous, because if you don't cull rigorously, you're just not going to make progress. So we set the bar really high. And this is an example. On the left photo shows a field. This is at the Maui Ag Research Center at Kula, commonly called the Kula Station. This picture shows 7 rows with 50 plants in a row. So there's 350 seedling plants. And after we got done culling, I think there was we spent 2 weeks, two different occasions. I came to Maui with the technician Pam Shingaki, who's an outstanding technician on this project for many years. And she and I did the culling. And when we were done, we had 5 plants left. So we discarded 345 of the 350 plants because they didn't make the cut. And in many cases, in fact, in many cases, we're able to cull the plants without even seeing the flower. Because if we're breeding, if we made that particular cross for stem characteristics and leaf characteristics, and it didn't show what we wanted, then we didn't care what the flower looked like. So we just off them. In summary, I think the first releases might have been around 1995, and then for the next 5, 6, 7 years, we released 102 new introductions that were selected from over 7,000 hybrid seedlings. So that's only 1.4%. So we discarded 98.6%. Culling rigorously, it's important. That's the way we were able to come up with some really outstanding materials. And it's also indicates how expensive it is to do a breeding project. When you're throwing away 98% of your stuff, and you put all the effort into it, the manpower, the field labor, the technical assistance, and many other things, it's very expensive. That's why breeding programs are often supported by royalty income from the products that result from the breeding. Okay, let's move on. Frosty, another lineary hybrid, one of my favorites, hybrid 89, large flowers, relatively narrow foliage, and a really long flowering season. I think about 8 months on this. Hybrid 81, this says PC tolerant. PC, you'll see PC here and there in my presentation. That's Phytophthora cinnamomum. That is the most significant root rot problem with Leucospermum, and we did a lot of screening for tolerance to Phytophthora cinnamomum, and identified many that have tolerance. Usually it came from a species Formosum, but not always. Anyway, this one has it. Here's a plant that's really different. Hybrid 165. We released it with an asterisk, and I'll explain that. I think it's got about 6 different species in the background, and I don't know which ones contributed to this color combination, but it's just such a beautiful combination. When you look at this plant from 50, 80 feet away, and it's full of flower, it really looks like it's on fire. It's just so stunning. However, it didn't have the base life that we wanted. It didn't meet our criteria for base life to release it as a cut flower. I'll explain. We set the minimum standard for base life at 15 days. And how we did that, how we measured that was, when I was on Maui, at the end of the day, we would cut, whatever we wanted to evaluate for base life, a bunch of hybrids, and I would take them back to my lab in Honolulu at the Manoa campus, and keep them in my lab, which is air conditioned at about 60, I don't know what the temperature is, mid 60s, 66, 67, something like that. For 2 days, then on the 3rd day, open them up, unpackage them, cut a ½ an inch off, and then put them in flasks with plain water and no preservative. And from that point, the plant had to go 15 days and still have be a marketable plant. And if it met that criteria, then we checked that off. It had adequate base life. This plant maxed out at 13 days. So it fell 2 days short of our minimum criteria for base life. But we released it anyway, and we told people that this is a great landscape plant, or if you're not shipping it and you're just going to cut it and throw it in a 5-gallon bucket and drive it down to your florist shop in Kahului, then that's fine. You'll have plenty of base life. So anyway, it was named Ali'i, and it was released. And every year we had a field day. And this is just an example of one of the field days. I don't remember which year this was, but we would, during a period of time when plants were in full flower, and we give people who attended a fact sheet describing the parents of each one, whatever we knew about, whatever data we had collected, we would share that on the fact sheet, give it to the growers, have them go through the field, and then get their comments. And then also they would place orders, and at a later time, usually in some day in September, we would harvest the cuttings and distribute them. This is Pam Shingaki here. This is Patty Nakao. She did a lot of work also on the project. This is the county agent for Mai at the time, Clark Hashimoto, and I don't know most of the others. Well, let's just spend a moment on this. When we started this, the grower said, Ken, if you can do this disease tolerance, if you can create that, if you can give us a nice big yellow for Mother's Day, if you can give us a nice big red for Valentine's, if you can do all this stuff, this industry is going to explode. And right now it's $1 million, and it'll go to 5, it'll go to 10, and in 10 years it'll be 25 million. they had such high expectations or maybe hope for it, and it didn't happen. And I don't think varieties had anything to do with it, frankly. I think, and Pam Shigaki and I would talk about this on frequently, that the business, there's only a relatively small number of growers, half a dozen at the most, perhaps, that are really full-time Protea farmers and making their living at it. The majority of the growers are part-timers, or they're retired, or they do it as supplemental income, and they have an acre and they put a half acre of it into Protea, and that's kind of verified by these figures here. These are just random figures from 2005 to 2020. So you look at the number of farms. These are a number of farms that had that recorded sales of Protea. 28, 30, 20, 31, down to 16. Quantity sold, 1.6 million down to 650,000. The value of sales on 2005 is 1.9 million, then 2.1, then 1.3, then 900, 800. Now it's down to 650. But it's just, it never grew. In fact, it is only, it's less than 1/3. 655,000 is like 31% of 2.1 million. And revenue per farm was 68,000. It's 70,000 was the high mark here. 30, 41. I live in Windward, Oahu, in Waimanalo. It's a rural area, a lot of nurseries and around, and I'm in walking distance within 3 nurseries that collectively have gross income of approximately $10 million. Okay, Hawaii Sunshine Nursery, 3 doors down the road, you got Leilani Nursery and Native Farms, and collectively they do $10 million worth of business. So this 655,000 is really, it's minuscule. So why am I pointing that out? It's absolutely not to belittle the situation. It's to show that there's a lot of opportunity. To me, this shows it's a positive thing. It's not positive that the revenues drop, but it just means that there's a lot of opportunity. But I don't think the opportunity are in the traditional locations where Protea has been grown, like Kula, for example. $1 million for an acre. There's no crop that you can pay that on. And there's not a lot of agricultural land that's affordable in those areas. Okay, so oops, sorry. What we started doing, Pam and I started, so let's breed for low elevation tolerance, heat tolerance, tropical Leucospermums, because where is the affordable land? We have sugar plantations going out of business. We have pineapple plantations going out of business. Those lands are under 500 feet. They're mostly from sea level to 200 or 300 feet. And those lands are becoming available and they're much less expensive. So right now, the varieties that the growers are using can't be grown at those locations. So let's find some genetics that for warm temperature tolerance and see if we can create tropical Proteas. So we completely changed the breeding criteria. So this slide here, hybrid 79, it's I forget the name, but it's a really good variety. And here it is on the left side at the Kula station on Maui, and at the right, it is at about 90 meters, about 300 feet elevation at, I don't know if this place exists anymore, but there was a place in the valley on Maui called Maui Tropical Plantation. It was a tourist destination, and they had a bunch of crops that you could take a trolley through, and you could see a macadamia orchard and a papaya orchard and one thing or another. The management there gave us a plot and said, go ahead and try it, you do what you want. So this is hybrid 79 at that location. It just sprawling out, and we didn't know, we still don't know exactly what the relationship is between environment and plant architecture. Perhaps excessive respiration would do that, but we're not really sure. We screened a lot of plants at this location and also at we screened a bunch of species at Maui Community College, which is right at sea level, maybe 30, 50 feet at sea level, to try to identify species and some of the older hybrids that had any degree of warm temperature tolerance. 2004, along comes Thomas Littleton from Costa Rica, and got an ag background. His dad's a pineapple plantation manager in South Africa, and he came to University of Hawaii, wanted to do a master's degree, came to me, said, I'm interested in ornamentals, I want to have a nursery when I go back to Costa Rica. And I said, I got a project for you, okay? And it was identified the sources of warm temperature tolerant for Leucospermum and helped me initiate a breeding program. So we got a plot at HARC, Hawaii Ag Research Center, which is in Kunia at about 200 feet elevation. And we brought over a lot of material from species and hybrids from the Kula Station. We also had a companion location at the Waimanalo Research, the UH Research Station at Waimanalo at about 50 feet, maybe 50, 60 feet, something like that. So that's where we initiated the warm temperature tolerance research. Excuse me, I gotta have a drink. Oh, okay. So I said, Thomas, we have all these hybrids and all these species, and we need to know which, for the species, we need to know which ones are tolerant to warm temperature. For the hybrids that are tolerant to warm temperature, we need to know why. So what is it in the background? And here's an example of a plant, peppermint 262. I think there's 9 or 10 different species in the background. So, and it flowered nicely at both Waimanalo and Kunia. So it has warm temperature tolerance. But where is it? Is it from Formosum or Totem or Saxosum or Glabrum? Or we needed to determine where, in order to establish a breeding program. So I said, let's do this. Let's look at this. Let's look at taxonomic sections. And we had 11 we had 11 species that were involved in the background of the cut flower hybrids. We had several other species, but they're really small and they weren't used for any of them cut flower, to develop the cut flower hybrids. And some of them are like prostate plants. So the 11 species that were used in the hybrids fall into 4 of the 9 known taxonomic sections. These are them: Cardinostylus, Brevifilamentum, Conocarpodendron, and Crassicaudex. So, and we had a lot of plants with a lot of these in the background, all of these things. So I told Thomas, okay, you determine which hybrids flowered, and then go back to their genealogy and determine which taxonomic section made the contribution to flowering. And as it turns out, if a hybrid had 50% or more of any species in the Cardinostylus section, 85% of the time it flowered at Kunia or Waimanalo. And with 50% or more contribution from species in the section Brevifilamentum, 66% of the time it flowered, 47 for Conocarpodendron, 22. Okay, so we think we've identified the species that provide us the warm temperature tolerance, but this is not all that scientific. So let's get a statistical program that will verify that. And we talked to a statistician, Dr. Mark Wright. Some of you may know him. He's from South Africa. He's familiar with Prody. He actually worked with Prody before he came to UH. And he said, use principal component analysis, CPA, PCA, principal component analysis. And so that's what we did. And this is a data matrix that's got all of the hybrid numbers, and we put in, for each of these hybrids, we put in to the program the percentage of whatever species were involved. It was a lengthy thing to input all of this information, but there's 4 axes here. this axis here for flowering, this is the axis for flowering at low elevation. This is the axis for Cardenocylus section. This is the axis for Breviphilomenum section, and this is for Conocarpodendron. And what it shows, it confirms the previous slide. It confirms there our earliest understanding, our earliest inkling. I don't know, the word doesn't come to me. Suspicion that it is the species in the Cardenostylus section that are related, more closely related to flowering. The proximity of these two access to each other is that's a positive correlation. Okay. All right. So now what? We start to explore the species in the section Cardenostylus. There's another one that we don't have. There's four species, but we have Formosum, Reflexum, and Grandiflorum. Formosum has tolerance to Phytophthora and wet soils. It's the only species of all 49 species of Leucospermum. It's the only one that its native habitat is a bog. Okay, it's a wet, boggy area. So that's logically where you're going to find a root rot, a disease tolerance, and it has good tolerance to Phytophthora cinnamomum. Reflexum has tolerance to PC also, and really erect growth habit. And Grandiflorum is from a really hot, dry location in the Pearl Mountains, and we thought, okay, well, maybe that's got some warm temperature tolerance too. All these plants have undesirable characteristics, which is why they don't appear in the background of hardly any of the South African hybrids where they were breeding for showy flowers. Formosum has uninteresting color. It's got large leaves, and the plant it's not very erect. It has short stems and large leaves. Reflexum has very, I don't know, how do you describe it? The floral segments are weak. They're not very formidable. They're not very strong. It does have long stems and small leaves, but the leaves are hairy. And then Grandiflorum has large flowers, not very interesting color, has very large leaves. The plant it's got lots of leaves. It carries way too many leaves. It just a lot of disadvantages. But this is where we're going to have to go for the warm temperature tolerance. So we started making hybrids with these species. So here's some hybrids with Formosum as one parent. Spider on the lower left. This is a cross that was it's Formosum times Totem. It was made by a South African breeder, and it has a really high degree of Phytophthora tolerance, and they use this very widely, industry-wide. They use this as a rootstock, and they graft onto it so that they can broaden the areas that they can cultivate Leucospermum in, because it's got the rootstock has such good tolerance to soil fungal problems and wet soils. And then this is our hybrid here, 142, which has got also really good tolerance to PC. Here's one that's we wanted. How much can we dilute Formosum to try to get more interesting colors and longer stems and smaller? How much can we reduce Formosum in the germplasm of our hybrids and still keep the Phytophthora resistance? And we got it down. This one has 25%. One grandparent is Formosum. It also has Reflexum in it, so it's probably got some PC tolerance from both sides. But this one, hybrid 207, I don't know. I don't think it was ever released, frankly. But it's got nice large flowers. It's got long stems. It's got warm temperature tolerance, good erect growth habit. It's a really, really good plant. And more hybrids with Formosum in the background, Debbie Hamrick, 151 and 152. Both of these flowered nicely at Waimanalo and Kunia, which are the two low elevation test locations on Oahu. More hybrids with Reflexum. The one in the middle is Brandy Dela Cruz. I think, if you said, I want a warm temperature tolerant variety, and I'm just going to grow one, I don't want to grow any, just one, I would say Brandy de la Cruz is the one that you should grow. It's hybrid 74. Actually, being facetious, I don't recommend that you grow only one, but if you did, this would be the one. It's a very vigorous plant. It's easy to root cuttings, long stems, tolerant of wet soils, PC tolerance, and it's just, I just think I think it's the best of the warm temperature tolerant, at least the best of the orange ones. 232 on the right is another really nice one. Probably has maybe even better shape. Maybe some maybe like the color better. It's got tolerance to wet soils also. More reflexum hybrids. 145 named Norman for Norman Nagata. Norman Nagata is I think probably the best Protea plant pathologist in the UH system. He's really good at diagnostics, and so we named one after him. He worked with us for several years on this project and helped us identify the several plants that had Phytophthora PC tolerance or resistance. Grandiflorum as one parent. We're kind of reluctant. We did not have high expectations with Grandiflorum because it had so many disadvantages, just huge leaves, not straight stems, heavy stems, and a lot of disadvantages, but we used it. And we did have, occasionally we'd have some with erect growth habit. Flowers were large. The large size of the flowers came through in the hybrids, which is a nice thing if you like large flowers. And here's a couple, hybrid 159 and 229. They often had, did not have the erect growth habit that the cut flower grower would prefer or require. And so we would discard them. And looking back on that, I think I regret that we didn't give much thought to landscape material, because some of these plants that we discarded, I think would be really good for landscape purposes. But we still have some that we intend to promote as landscape plants. Grandiflorum is a few more. 155 is a really nice one. 140, I can't tell. More Grandiflorum hybrids. 159, it's kind of semi-erect, got a little bit of color in it. Okay, these are repeats of something I showed you. Here's Brandy de la Cruz again as a potted plant, and on the right side as a plant growing at my plot in Cunilla, where it had the same erect growth habit as it did at Kula. So it's definitely got a very high level of warm temperature tolerance. Jet is a really good one, 261. It's got five different species, warm temperature tolerance, Phytophthora tolerance. Very pleasing color in my opinion. 164 is a really nice thing. It's got warm temperature tolerance, got Saxosum in the background, and which from Saxosum we got a lot of, that's where we got our Elsinois scab tolerance. Most anything crossed with Saxosum, we couldn't even force the Elsinois scab disease onto the selection of Saxosum that we used. It was absolutely immune to it, which is a term that pathologists don't like to use because it's almost never true. You can have tolerance or resistance, but this plant was immune to Elsinois scab, and that was a heritable characteristic. Also had upright growth and good warm temperature tolerance. Saxosum itself is not very interesting. Small flower. We originally used it because I thought it might have warm temperature tolerance because it's the most equatorial of the species. It's from Zimbabwe, which is nearer to the equator. What I didn't realize at the time until later when I realized that we weren't getting any warm temperature tolerance out of this thing. And why is that? I started doing some more research, and it's from pretty high up in the mountains where it's pretty cold. We already talked about lineary. I got a couple extraneous slides here. More lineary hybrids. Just showing that on the hybrid 140 here, you can see that the leaves are really pretty narrow, and this is half lineary, and I don't know, half something else, or half several other things, but here's some more warm temperature tolerant hybrids that have erect growth habit. 151, 207. We already talked about that. Okay, I'm starting to repeat myself. 155, 262, 191, wasn't named, 162. These are all plants that you can grow at low elevations in Hawaii and expect a marketable product. And we want to promote that because we think that there's good opportunity for more Protea Leucospermum hybrid production in Hawaii. When I was talking earlier, when we had the slide with all the annual data and how things have gone, the opportunities that was there for increased production, I forgot to mention that there are wholesalers in Hawaii that purchase their pincushion proteas, their Leucospermum hybrids, from California growers during the season that Hawaii has flowers, and that's because they can't get enough. And I know this is a fact because I talked to them. Watanabe Floral Company, they have to get from California, and they're not the only ones. Okay, we're pretty much done here. This is a plant. This is a hybrid that Saxosum times Praecox. Okay, both of the Praecox has never been used for breeding for the cut flower types because it has absolutely no worthwhile characteristics. It's a low growing plant, almost a prostrate plant. Saxosum I mentioned to you earlier. I don't think you find it in any of the background of any of the African hybrids because it doesn't have many redeeming characteristics. But this cross produces hybrid 192, which was named Candlelight, which flowers every day of the year. It is always in flower. I had 3 plants at the Kunia location for 6 years, and every time I went out there, they were in flower, the whole bushes. So of course we wanted to breed with this plant because we thought we could overcome all the other undesirable characteristics like small size and short stems and on and on. But it's basically sterile, and we were unable to make any hybrids with it. So, and that's about it. Almost. I got a little more to show you, but that's it for the science part. That's it for the breeding program. What we started off as a criteria and what we changed the program into breeding for warm temperature tolerance to try to get varieties that we could promote for low elevation production. And 2 people, there's many people to thank, but the 2 made the biggest contribution are Thomas Littleton, my graduate student, and Pam Shingaki, the technician on Maui, who's later became the station manager and then retired. Now, just a few more slides to hopefully stimulate your interest. This is Mel Resendez, and this is Diana Roy. Mel has Resendez Brothers Protea growers. He and 3 brothers, unfortunately, two passed away from COVID. So it's now him and 1 brother who own the company. They have 550 acres, 300 acres in Mexico, 250 acres in northern San Diego County, and they grow only Protea. Diana Roy runs the office. She does all the marketing and just a couple of slides up there from. They have more UH varieties than anybody that I know, and they bought them all from Maui growers. This is their hybrid, and this is Brandy Dela Cruz. They have acres and acres of it. They love it. This is Roy collecting. I think this is hybrid 88, which is Jacqueline Louise. I'm remiss in not putting a photo of Jacqueline Louise in my presentation and talking about it because I think, in my opinion, it's the best of the yellows for warm temperature tolerance. If you don't give up on it in its early years, because in the first couple of years of growth, it's a really floppy plant and it grows on the ground and it just doesn't look like it has much promise. by years 3 and 4, it starts putting up more erect growth. And I had a plant at the Cunha station for many, many years. It probably got to be about 5 feet tall, and it was extremely prolific. It looked just like this, what you're seeing here. And it looked that erect and that floriferous. So I would include Jacqueline Louise. Hybrid 88 is a really, really outstanding one. Truckload of pin cushions. More hybrids. I think it's 74. I'm not sure. I don't know what these guys are holding, but this is Protea on the left and Leucodendron on the right, and just all the stuff out of the field. And and this is the very last slide. This is their store. This is stuff that you can purchase on their online store. The reason I bring this company up is because we have a really good relationship with them. They've given me I needed a place to grow some plants outside of Hawaii. And so they gave me a plot, and I have 15 different plant materials there, unreleased, yet to be released varieties. And each year I go there and harvest cuttings. I'm going there probably in September to harvest cuttings. I'll probably bring back 2,000 or 3,000 cuttings to distribute. That's if any of you who got the newsletter, my first newsletter they sent out in October of last year, those varieties that I offered free cuttings of came from this farm, and I'm going back again to get more to distribute to interested parties, and they will also be free. That's all I have, and I would only be rambling if I said anything more, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Cool. So we can open it up. If anybody wants to ask a question unmuted, go for it. And then if not, you can type it into the chat. Also, we can see, stop your sharing so we can see your face. Any questions, folks? Can you hear me? Okay, let's see. We do have a question through chat with somebody that's having issues with audio there, Ken. It's Mario over on Maui.
Hi, Mario.
Yeah. If you were going to start a low elevation farm, how many varieties would you start with? And this might be a good question for Jamie to kind of answer also from the production standpoint. So I'll let you go first there, Ken.
I don't want to sound like I'm passing the buck on this one, but our best trial to date is at Jamie's farm, where we had, how many? Did we have about 15, 18 different cultivars there? I'm not sure.
We'll go through it, but I can count them while you're talking.
Somewhere around that, yeah.
Something like that. Some of the release materials and some of the unreleased materials. And I think I came up with 14 or 15 from the Waimanalo and Cunha trial. By the way, the Waimanalo trial was not as successful as the Cunha trial. We terminated the Waimanalo trial as soon as Thomas Littleton got his degree. We were losing plants on a fairly regular basis there, largely because it's a montmorillonite clay soil, held a lot of water. The experiment station is right up against the cliffs. We got early shadow in the afternoon. We had reasonably high rainfall and a lot of overcast. The conditions for Protea were just not that good. But many of them did flower there normally until we lost them. The success at Cunha was much better, and we ran that plot from, I think, 2004 up until about 2 or 3 years ago. And then we kind of abandoned it. And from there, I identified about 15. And I think those were grown at Jamie's place. And we still have them. So I don't know how many, 10 to 15. Before you plant, we can have another conversation, and I'll have more information. I'll be able to answer that question better, and we'll have more information from Jamie's farm.
Great. Thanks.
I can do a quick comment on that too. And just, I didn't introduce myself, but I am Jamie Barton. I have 2 Bs Protea, and I was the former farm manager at the Hark Research Station. So that's how Ken and I met and how I found out about all of these beautiful flowers. But yeah, just to answer that question, I would say of the somewhere around 14, 15 varieties that we have, I've identified at least like 6 that I want to grow more of for sure. And then a whole bunch of other ones that at 2.5 years, I feel like it's too early to say. So, and it's probably partially, some of it is just our management of the crop itself and just kind of learning as we go, how to properly manage the crop. Because I think there are a few that we have that might actually have more potential once we dial in what's happening with them nutritionally, and just kind of dial in the irrigation system as well. So I guess if you were, I wouldn't choose less than, if you have access to a lot, I wouldn't choose less than like 5, because it could be that just, even if they all do well, you might just decide you like some better than others. And then just from an agronomic standpoint, you know, if one of them succumbs to some type of like pest disease, whatever, at least then you don't lose your whole crop if you diversify. So I would answer that.
Yeah, then there's another factor, and that is that, you know, small differences in soil types and microclimates can contribute to whether or not a plant is successful in your area. Something that's you know, from one farm to the next, it's not always the same varieties that perform the best. So I think it's safe to grow, if you know it, grow the ones that you know are perform well, and then if you have some area to experiment and be a little speculative, get a half a dozen plants of another 10 varieties, and find out for yourself which of those perform the best on your farm and increase those. And obviously, this is over time, but
yeah, and that's exactly what we did. Ken was like, you can't plant enough of 74 and 88, so put those ones in for sure, and then we'll try all these other ones and see how they do at your site. And so that's kind of what we did. And from there, we're just picking the ones that look good at our place. But even that being said, I'm still curious to try others because they're just interesting, and there's so many beautiful different varieties and combinations to work with. So
Thanks. So we've got one more question through chat. This is Taylor in Waimanalo. They're interested in growing at their farm. They got a variety of landscapes, hills, flatland, shaded, unshaded portions of the property. What would you choose as the ideal setting in Waimanalo? In ground, above ground? Any recommendations?
invite me over. I live in Waimanalo. Invite me over. You're my neighbor. We can talk about it on your farm.
Yeah.
David Fell, you probably know David Fell. He and his wife Sandy are the founders and owners of Hawaii Sunshine Nursery for many, many years. They're retired now. They live in Waimanalo. They are way, way, way back against the mountain. And I gave them some a few different varieties some years ago. They have a hybrid 74 Brandy Delacruz that's about 8 feet wide and about 6 feet tall, and it's got about 200 flowers on it, and it looks gorgeous every year. Maybe that doesn't answer your question, but I'm where are you located?
are you in the back or like close to the mountain or farther? I would say, Ken, tell me what you think, but I would think potentially, well, not unshaded and potentially hills, unless you have good drainage, or unless your hills are really rainy. That would be my guess, just because the hills would then help with the drainage, and then they look.
Okay, I see the message in the chat says Kaka'aina Place. Oh, that road that dead ends right off Kaka'aina Place. Yeah, I know where that is. Let's put some on your property and see what happens.
Okay, sure. I don't know if this unmuting is working, but I would love to have you over anytime, and whatever you think, I would love to experiment.
Okay, we're rooting some plants now. We got, I don't know how many, it's a few hundred, and we have plans for most of them, but I'll pull out a half a dozen, one each of a half
Okay.
a dozen different things, and we'll put them on your property.
So we'll
Great.
probably,
And we go to the VAA meetings as well, so I can
Okay.
connect with you there.
Yes, yeah, do that, please. Okay.
so, and just a comment on that, because we have other questions about plant releases here. We will have a limited amount of plants after we've evaluated them. And once they've rooted up, to ship out to interested persons who have attended these 2 different field day and webinar events. But what I need you to do is fill out the survey that I end up sending, and that will qualify you to get plant material, what plant material we do have for release afterwards. So just know that. So that question was for Eric, and yeah, we'll be able to ship.
I'm
to-
in,
let me-
I'm in the,
You can. And then Mario, we're going to answer the question on elevation for Jamie's farm in the next section, so you can get an idea. But actually, it resembles your elevation. Actually, I don't remember which elevation you're at, but we'll talk about that. But I thought of your farm and her farm being somewhat similar. So I'm going to unmute you, Ken. Sorry, I just muted you. Oh, 1,200 foot. Never mind. It's way lower than yours. So with that.
Somebody
Okay.
asked about temperatures. Is there an upper temperature limit, Ken? Oh, you're still muted.
hello?
Yep. you're
Gotcha.
good.
Okay. I don't know if there's an upper temperature limit. We've never, I mean, what,
It got really hot in Cunha.
yeah,
We were
Cunha
at, like,
gets- yeah,
200 foot
that's
elevation
probably
and-
the hottest place that we've grown them. What temperatures have you recorded there when you were?
Oh gosh,
managing
it would
that
probably
place?
get into the low 90s in the summer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll go into temps there also.
Yeah, yeah, I would think so. So when I'm not sure I use the right terminology when I say warm temperature tolerance, but the plants have typically the original varieties have a requirement for cold conditions or 50-degree temperatures, low and mid 50 temperature. They have the requirement for that low temperature for the plant to initiate flower buds. So what we've done is we've bred away from that. We've bred for plants that don't have the requirement for that cold condition. We refer to it as warm temperature tolerance, but technically it's probably not that. It's probably a lack of the requirement for the cold temperature to initiate buds.
Has anyone ever looked into sort of like a chemical treatment or, I don't know, something like that to
Well,
initiate flowering?
Um,
Or even, I don't know
yeah,
if
for many other crops, you can use gibberellic acid to initiate flowering in plants that, but I don't know of anyone who's done that with Leucospermum. Yeah, I can't think of. I've not come across that kind of research papers. Anybody else?
Okay, we got Patio Nelson, Big Island, location Ocean View, 3,100 feet, 7 lots. Welcome to visit and would love to plant any varieties. We have over about 4,500 plants mixed with Protea, Kings, Lynx, Pins. Fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
I'll have to come over there, Patio, because I'm on Big Island, so I could come visit. And if Ken comes at some point, he can come with me.
Yeah, I would love to do that. And please stay in touch. Everyone who's interested, please give Russell your email contact, because I'm going to use that list to send out my next newsletter, which will have information about cutting release and some other stuff. By the way, there's an upcoming international Protea conference that will be held in San Diego in April 2025. So But
And,
it's down the road, but
nice.
make time for it.
So with that, if you are at this event, go ahead and give me your email, because what we'll do is we'll only send out the survey to folks that are at this event proper. So please put your email or contact information. You can send it as a chat to me. Don't worry, I'll also save the participants list in case you forget, but it would be convenient if you send me your email also. I'm going to do that right now. Great.
Thank you for attending. I appreciate your interest in the topic.
Thank you, Ken, for your talk. So we're going to jump into the variety trial that we did at Jamie's farm. And we're going to kind of combine it. We thought that since we did such a good field day video, that a lot was covered in what Jamie's talk would be. So what we're going to do is Jamie and I are going to tag team. So Jamie, when I see photos that you've added, she just added them today, so we didn't have a chance to kind of collaborate on when she's talking. I'll just hand it over to you. And I'll also ask you every once in a while if you have anything to say. Just stop me also.
Okay.
And, just give me a second while I get this loaded up. How's that, everyone? Can you see it? Somebody let me know that you can see the shared screen.
I can
Yeah,
see it.
yeah, it's on the monitor.
Okay, great.
Russ, I'm gonna leave if I may.
Okay. Oh, darn. It'll be sad not to have you for if we have question and answer, but if anybody has questions that we can't answer, I'll shoot them to you later on, but totally understandable. I appreciate it, Ken. Thanks for coming tonight and spending your evening.
Thanks, Ken.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. All righty.
Okay, sorry, but I have
No
guests
worries.
in town that
No, totally get it. Yep. All righty, Ken.
Okay.
See you later.
thank you. All right, adios.
Yeah. Okay, no, now that Ken's leaving, nobody else is allowed to leave until we're done. Even if it goes till
Good.
Oh,
Track them down if they try to track.
just imagine this says May 31st, folks. Okay. Because I'm giving the same talk we gave on the 20th. So we did this variety trial at Jamie's farm, now named 2B's farm. It started in April 2021 when we began planting, and data collection began in October of 2021. The cuttings that we planted were around 8 months to a year old when planted. We had received the cuttings, Ken and myself, and planted rooted and slightly unrooted cuttings. Actually, they were unrooted pretty much cuttings at Manoa at the Magoon Research Station. We grew them for 8 months or up to a year and then planted them at Waialua. This is below the Pomohu Research Station, and I have the elevation at around 400 feet, but it's, I believe, between 400 and 500 feet, right, Jamie?
Yeah, we're about 550 where I'm at.
Oh, okay.
That's my spot, but yeah.
Just give you an idea, the Kula location where they were growing Protea for variety trials in the past is 2099, so quite a bit higher. For data collection, we took width, height, health, flowering time, and yield. What we were really trying to do in this trial was see what survived and see what flowered, right? So plants that we could continue to evaluate afterwards. Now, to give you an idea, this is around 2.5 years or so of data collection. So the plants are in the ground around that period of time. So we're not even into the stage where they're at their most productive. So we did not take vase life, and we did not take stem height or flower characteristics other than just subjective pictures. That's something that we're looking to do in the future with varieties that we've determined are good ones, keepers. So here's what we planted originally. You can see it's quite a few varieties. I think it's 20 in total with the mimetis and the grevillea on there. Anything in red completely died at this location. Anything in yellow, we're talking about the data collection for today. The reason we're not talking about them all is because we're not entirely sure they are the right varieties that they say they are. So we don't want to give information on varieties that may be mislabeled. And we're still trying to figure out some of the varieties themselves, so keep that in mind. This is a Jamie photo.
It's just a nice photo of the farm overall. This was recently, so things are kind of going out of production right now.
Yeah, so if you want a really good image and understanding of the plot that Jamie was working at and where we planted, we've got that field day video. So go ahead and watch that if you haven't watched it already, or it might be helpful to go back and rewatch it afterwards, because what you hear today may inform some things you're thinking about in the field day video. So here's the temperature data. This is from the Pomo research station, so it's only about a quarter mile away. So the temperature data is pretty accurate. So you're asking what were the highest temperatures that we were seeing in this location, and you can see we break 90 in the summers, and we hit mostly high 80s during the summers for highs, and upper 60s, low 70s for the lows. Now in winter it decreases, of course, but you can see some of that fluctuation and what the protea were dealing with at this site. So it looks like they can grow in the high 80s to low 90s for the highest temperatures from what we know already, right? We haven't trialed them successfully at lower elevation with higher temperatures.
Well, and I think some of these were planted in Cunha, and Cunha, it's not upper Cunha, it's lower Cunha, so it's really more like Waipahu, and it's hotter than where we're at right now. So some of them have grown in warmer spots. So we don't have.
I have not seen the temperature data for that, so I don't want to say.
Yeah. I only know because I used to record it every day. Yeah.
And you're looking at relative humidity here. This isn't going to give you much information other than it stayed pretty humid throughout the trial at this location. And that would be because even though we did see periods of drought, there was pretty somewhat consistent humidity events, so rainfall. If you're seeing anything, this is the rainfall data that we're looking at. If you're seeing any bar at all, that was a rainfall event. But most of those are 0.008 inches. So it's barely anything at all. Anything that you see above that green line is a very significant rain event, to give you an understanding of how much it rained at this location. But maybe Jamie can talk about that a little bit too. Did you see droughts and high rainfall?
Yeah, last not this year's winter, but the winter of 22 was actually very dry, unseasonably dry for us. We ended up having a big rainfall event in December of 2021 that caused die-off of some of our plants. We still aren't quite sure why.
You're talking right here.
Would have been 2021, December 2021. I'm not sure if you have that on. No, it starts in April 21, so we don't have that yet, or at least on this graph. But yeah, and then it was really dry after that, unseasonably dry after that. And then, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so either way, that caused some issues for us in terms of just fungal pressure. And we kind of saw the same thing again this spring, right around April. In terms of fungal pressure, although I don't see rainfall events on here. So.
Great. So jumping straight into the varieties, the first one we're going to talk about is 679. So a lot of these are going to have a synonym, and that's just because they were trialed at different sites and they were given different names at different sites. So we just decided to put both names that we knew them as. So if people had an idea that they were one variety or another one. So just keep in mind, most of these numbered varieties are labeled one number, but they have a synonym that's another number. So for example, 679 may be labeled 260 in somebody else's head if they know that plant from a previous trial, right? And so this is 679. Maybe, how do you want to do it, Jamie? Do you want to talk first about the plants and then have me go through? Because you can talk while the plant photos are up themselves.
Sure. Yeah. So we didn't end up harvesting very many of these plants specifically, or these flowers specifically, mostly because you can kind of see in that first photo on the left, there's not a lot of branching. So there weren't a lot of flowers to harvest. If we went in and took those flowers off, we would have ended up with a lot less plant material. So we were pretty selective. Unless the plants were a little bit larger, we tried not to take too many. And then when I was harvesting during the season, like for sale, I would select from plants where I could harvest at least usually about 10 or so flowers of the same color or same variety. That way I could kind of group them. I was either making bouquets or delivering, quantities in tens, basically like 30 to 50 flowers or so at a time. So we didn't harvest very many of these, but I really love this one. This is one that I would like to propagate more of. The flowers are a little bit heavy, the heads are a little bit large, and there's another one we're going to see later in the presentation that's similar to this, and I'll point it out when we get to it, but it looks really similar. But I do really, really like the flower, and the plants look very healthy.
And so here's another image of the plants there, another of the flower. So what you're going to look at here is the data collection from October 21st to February 2023.
Actually, I'm sorry, I actually made a mistake. I mixed this one up with a different one. These were not very healthy. I apologize. The one we're going to look at next was very healthy. These ones in this particular row, I don't know if it was just the location in the field or what exactly, but these did not do very well. So the person who asked the question earlier, where you were asking about how many different varieties you should try on your new farm, yes, I would try a plot of several different varieties and randomize them, which is not ideal for production, but you can avoid situations like this where I believe there's something going on in the field in that row, and that everything that was in that field just did really poorly. And I think it's just like an area of accumulation. So there's, I think, worse drainage and different nutritional things going on there. So I wouldn't write off a variety necessarily unless you've sort of randomized it. So anyway, that's sort of a side thing, but that could be helpful for someone who's looking to plant these on like a larger scale.
Great, thanks. So
Yeah.
for every one of these, there's going to be a left-hand graph that's average health. That's based on this subjective scale. Oh, whoops, sorry. So if the plant has a 5, it means it's got less than 10% unhealthy tissue. So it's really healthy. If it's got a 1, it's got 60% or more unhealthy tissue. So you're looking at a really unhealthy plant. And to give you an idea, a plant around 3 is not very healthy. This is one that's pretty significantly damaged. It's got almost 40%, between 20 or 40%, normally closer to 40% unhealthy tissue. So for a while, these were pretty unhealthy plants. And I think Jamie pointed out that you could see in the graph, they always dipped in the March, April, May time period. So plant health is dependent a little bit on weather events. We also have on the right-hand side, average width and average height, just to give you an idea of over from October 21st, 2021 to February 2023, how large these plants grew. And this one, 679, grew to around almost 2 feet wide and a little bit more than 2 feet tall. And this is average for 5 plants. So flowering, we're looking at the flowering time for these plants from October 2021 to April 2023. One thing that you should note is that we're missing October, November, December for 2022 because we could not collect data during that time. And at the bottom, you're looking at the yield. It's not averaged for all 5 plants. It's the total yield that we collected from all 5 plants that we were harvesting from for that period. So in total, we got 51 flowers throughout the harvest time from December 2021 to February 2023. 171, also known as 590. You want to talk a little bit about it first, Jamie?
Yeah, sure. I harvested quite a few of these flowers, and 590 is going to look pretty similar to 620 and 626. All 3 of those have this sort of peach color. The tips are a little bit purple. They open nicely. 590, I don't know, again, like some of these things, it could be there could be agronomic things impacting the way the plant is growing at this stage, and I'm not sure yet. But it seems like 590 had a little bit more of a like compact growth. The stems were not quite as long and straight as some of the other ones that had kind of a similar flower shape. So probably not, of the three that we're going to look at that are kind of similar, I would say this is probably my favorite of the three, just for that reason.
Okay. And here's what it looks like in the field, larger image, a little bit wider. So a little bit healthier in general than 679, but around the same health conditions. So started to decrease through 2022 spring and summer, and increased into late summer and fall for plant health. This plant did get a little bit taller than 679, around 3 feet average width for each plant, and close to between 2.5 and 3 feet for the average height. Now, consistent flower, started flowering in March of 2022 and stayed flowering pretty much until we stopped taking flowering data in April of 2023. Also, one of the more prolific flowers with 181 total plants harvested throughout the period. 81 of those and then 65 of those were in January and February of 2023.
Going to chime in really quick. You said 181 plants, but it was 181 flowers.
Yeah, sorry.
And just, oh no, that's okay. And then just one thing to keep in mind is they weren't harvested, they were just counted.
Yeah.
So these weren't necessarily stems, like saleable stems. They were just
Oh yeah,
the number
sorry.
of flowers we count, which I think you said that already, but just to remind people, because you get really excited about the number, but a lot of these plants, this one specifically, has a really kind of compact growth with a lot of what did he call it? I kept calling it tillering.
Antlers.
Antlers. It's got a lot of just different branches coming off of it and short stems. So there's a lot of flowers. It might be a really great landscape plant, and or it might be a great cut flower at somebody else's site, and it just might not like our location that much.
Sure,
So,
thanks.
but a lot of flowers.
I didn't mention that, so I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah, so we were counting the flowers. We weren't actually harvesting them. We were just counting number of flowers. Thanks, Jamie. 583, also known as 164. Take it away, Jamie.
Oh yeah, here you can go to the next slide. Well, you can actually hear, so some of these photos are a little bit older and some are more recent. So this photo that you're showing is actually when these plants were looking good. More recently, they have really rapidly declined, which is sad because, yeah, there you go. Because if you go back to the flower photo, the flowers are so pretty. I love the flowers, but the plant just struggles. It's got what I think it is I think it's a nutritional deficiency. One of the challenges with growing so many different varieties is it's kind of like what Ken said. You know, some varieties might do better in a certain environment for various reasons. Same thing goes for growing a whole bunch of varieties in one location. Some are going to do better and some are just not going to do quite as well because we're giving all of the plants the same amount of water, the same amount of fertilizer, you know, the same amount of attention in every way. And that's not what each individual plant needs. So from an agronomic perspective, it's actually really complicated to manage a plot like this because what you want to do is you want to really dial it in and find out what that plant needs. But 20 different tissue samples gets very expensive. So we're kind of still working it out. So if we can figure out what's going on with this plant and it's something that can be fairly easily corrected, then I would love to grow more of it. But if it's, you know, something where it needs to be babied for some reason in our location, we just won't grow it at our site. So yeah, this is more what they look like now.
Yeah, it looked a lot like this for a good portion of the trial. So, and you can see when some of that is happening, that stippling damage, which is probably from either mites or thrips. We didn't ID the pest, but again, in that time period, we saw a decrease in plant health. Subjectively. but it did get healthier in September and January, or in September of 2022, almost through January, but started to decrease again in February of 2023. Average height and width, so just over 29 inches for both the height and width. Now this one started flowering.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to point out really quick, we stopped collecting data in February this year, but I can already see from the beginning of May to now, almost early June, that the plants are starting to look healthier again. So they're following the same curve this year, which is not on this graph. So basically you would see almost this identical situation continuing, where it has dipped down it would be March 23, April 23, May, and then it seems like it's starting to come back up. So whatever's going on, it seems to be impacting this specific time of year, right around flowering.
Cool. Well, not cool for you. But.
Yeah.
Started flowering a little bit later than the varieties we've seen already, April 2022. And we did have a period where it was not flowering and began flowering again in 2023 in January that we know of. Lower in terms of the amount of flowers that we counted. So 83 total, most of them being in January 2023 and February 2023. Remember, ask questions as you go along through the chat. We can answer them. 620. Take it away, Jamie.
Yeah, I like this one. This one is again that kind of same. It looked really similar to 590, but it appeared to me to have longer stems. Everything else about the plant pretty much seemed the same. The flowers are very similar. For a while, I actually thought that we had a whole bunch of the same plant, just with different labels. But once I started working with them more, I realized that no, they are actually different. But the differences are very. You have to be in the plants and working with them a lot, I feel like, to even notice. That's what but yeah, so I did like this one a little better than 5.
Great.
Pretty, I harvested a lot.
And so you can see it did not have as deep of a decline as some of the other varieties we've looked at in terms of health, at least from the recorded variety, or the recorded plants that we were collecting data from. And it also got much wider than the ones we've talked about already at 42 inches. And fairly tall at 33 inches after that growth period from October till February 2023. Also a consistent flower and one of the highest yielders in terms of actual flower production. So you can see began flowering in December of 2021. Not sure we saw any downtime necessarily to this plant's flowering. And once you hit January 2023 and February 2023, the number of flowers on this plant were pretty profuse.
Yeah, and I guess one thing to throw out there, Ken had mentioned something about, the plants having a season versus flowering year round. And he said that one plant, Candlelight, flowers year round, as if that's a unique thing. And I think it is. Something, but I didn't know, this is something that Ken mentioned at the field day workshop, was that when the plants are younger, I don't know the way he exactly described it, but he basically said they're still kind of figuring out what their season is. I don't know. And so their off-season flowers are something that can just happen. So if you guys are looking at this and going, oh, this flowers year round, it might in these early stages where there's like 2 flowers, in the middle of summer or something like that. But that wouldn't be the norm, I don't think. But I don't know. I mean, if you look at this one, that's actually really interesting because July, 25 flowers is not nothing off of 5 plants. I mean, it's not that much, but it's better than April, when April's supposed to be the high season. So anyway, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I wouldn't completely write it off, but I wouldn't expect it to continue flowering like heavily through summer. But we'll see.
602, aka 183. Now I know this was a photo you put in specifically, Jamie, so you may want to talk about that.
Yeah, so I put in this photo on the right. This is the plants right now, and this is two of them at the very end that aren't being impacted by some of the fungal issues we're having. Generally speaking, this plant up until 2 months ago was very, very healthy looking, when some of the others had started to really decline. The flowers are really nice. They were my favorite. Last year, not this past season, but the season before. But that's really because I hadn't seen a lot of the other plants flower yet. And so it's really hard to tell when they're young because you just don't really get a good idea of what they're going to look like when you only have like one per plant or one per row. And these ones flowered early and they flowered heavily, and the flowers are really big. I was actually hoping Ken would be on the call for this because he mentioned one of the species backgrounds that I think this one might be heavy in. I think he said grandiflorum. Anyway, it doesn't matter, but it's got a really huge flower and it's got kind of the shape of the, I think, grandiflorum. These are probably like the size of a grapefruit and they're very orange. It's not exactly my favorite flower now because I put this photo to the one on the right. But not because it's not an amazing flower, it really is. I just don't, that's not my favorite color. Of all the ones that we have, I find some of the other ones to be more beautiful, but this is a really big, gorgeous flower. And I'm curious what the vase life is like too, because to me, it seems like they start to turn that darker, more like burnt orange color more quickly than some of the other varieties, but I don't know for sure. So something I'm interested for us to look at in the future.
Great. So here we are looking at average health. Another one that didn't dip too much in from the plants that we recorded, right? So you don't see it going too low below 3. Now it does hover between 3.5 through most of the data collection period. And like most of the varieties, the quality of the plants increases into late 2022. And then you can see it starting to decrease again and most likely doing what Jamie's talking about is having a little bit of that ebb and flow in health. Fairly large plant from a width perspective, around 40 inches average, and then around 3 feet, 36 inches in height.
And in the last few months, they've gotten really tall.
In
the last like 2 months or so, they're very tall all of a sudden. They've really taken off.
Great. Began flowering in March 2022 for us, and we recorded at least some flowering throughout the data collection period. A total of 384 flowers were counted through this data collection period for those 5 plants. (626), also known as 207 in some circles.
Yeah, I like this one. This one, I think the flower is probably the prettiest of the 3 that look similar. The 590, the 620, and the 66. This is my favorite flower. The plant photos themselves don't look that pretty. The actual plant right now looks really good. So these are older photos and they've got, when you see that kind of reddish flower on it, people who grow these know that those are just old flowers. But yeah, they actually look really nice now. Structure wise, they're looking pretty good too. And to me, they appear to have longer stems than the 590 as well. They're more similar to the 620. But I like the flower better. I think it's a little bit bigger too, but I'm not sure. I haven't harvested enough to know for sure. They're really similar in size, but I think that one's a little bit bigger.
Yeah, so in terms of health, we're looking at a fairly healthy plant. Again, average width of 38.8 inches, so a little bit wider than tall, and just over 30 inches for the ultimate height in February of 2023. Began flowering a little bit early compared to the other varieties, but of course, like Jamie said, that's all dependent on plant age. We really don't know the seasonality necessarily yet after these 2 years. So December 2021 began flowering. We saw some consistent flowering throughout our recorded months, and then ultimately counted 271 total flowers from the 5 plants. Again, most of those being in January and February. of 2023. So you can see some consistency here in the varieties that we've selected. And now keep in mind, we've kept some varieties out that either didn't do great or we just didn't like. 633.
Yeah, this one, I wish I had a more recent photo of the plant. I couldn't find one on my phone, but yeah, the flower is so cool. I actually also really like the leaves. You can kind of see it on this one on the right-hand side if you look just below the flower. The leaves just have a really interesting look and shape to them, and I think it's pretty. The color is really interesting too. It comes out almost like a neon orange color, but it starts to fade kind of quickly. I don't know. I don't know how other people feel about it. I feel like it fades a little bit fast when it first starts to open. It's really, really pretty. The one thing I didn't love about this, and I'm seeing it especially right now, is just it just sort of flops over and grows on the ground, and the stems aren't very straight. And then because of that strange growth, the flower heads turn a lot. So when I would try to harvest them, I'd end up with sort of like bent flower heads, I guess, frequently. So I harvested this one sometimes. I have an entire row of it, so I should have been able to harvest a lot of these, and I just couldn't use most of them because I didn't really know how to use them with that strange shape where they turn the head.
Now these stayed fairly unhealthy for most of the trial. You can see they dip into the 2.5, so they're reaching almost 40% or more unhealthy tissue. But you can't really tell that necessarily from the plants when you're looking at them in the photograph. And they also did not get very tall. So these were some of the shortest variety. This is one of the shortest varieties we took data on in this trial. For the plants that we collected data at around 18 inches total height, all said and done at the end of the trial. But they did grow fairly wide at just over 3 feet. Now we did not see as consistent flowering in the plants that we collected data from. So these started flowering late July 2022, and we saw some non-flowering periods of time. We started to collect flowering data again in January of 2023 and did see flowering through April of 2023.
The yield's been overall just pretty low on these.
Yeah.
Not much even during the peak season this year. There just wasn't very much there.
Yeah, and you can see that in the total number of flowers counted from those 5 plants. So not prolific in this trial, at least so far. It would be nice to see if we could tweak it because I do like that flower, and it is fairly small, right? This flower is a little bit of a
more compact.
So cute though. 576. I'll jump right to the flower itself. Do you have anything you want to say about 576 there, Jamie?
The very first flower that I was telling you guys about is what I meant to say about this flower. This is the one that I like and I'm going to propagate more of. And there's another one that's kind of similar to this that has a little bit more of a reddish hue to it. Like the pins are more red than orange. I really like these. I didn't harvest very many because there were not very many stems to harvest this year. So they grow fairly upright. The plants are pretty tall. We also didn't, I guess this is a good time, and I don't know if folks on the call right now watched our field day or not. If you haven't, I'd encourage you to, because we talk about a lot of the agronomics and things we did in the field, but I have not pruned most of the plants in the field. I have now in the past 2 weeks, but prior to the workshop, I hadn't pruned any of the plants. So I think some of these probably could have been pruned sooner, and maybe I would have ended up with a few more stems to harvest just by helping kind of shape these a little bit and encourage some, not tillering, but branching, antlering, whatever. But yeah, either way, they're very, very pretty flowers. I'm going to try to grow more of these and see how they do. Not a lot of disease pressure either. At least at this point, they're some of the healthiest plants in the field.
Yeah, so we did see, at least from the data collection standpoint, that while there wasn't, maybe have not been disease pressure, there could have been something that was leading them to have a slightly lower plant health rating. But you can see from these images that when these pictures were taken, they were pretty healthy plants, but you can see they're a little bit less healthy in this earlier photo. But all in all, yeah, this was a fairly good plant. The one thing is we don't have a lot of this variety in the field, right, Jamie? I think total we had 4 plants, so we actually weren't even collecting data from 5 plants for this selection, which is tough too because we're not getting as much cutting material out of it.
Right.
Average, completely average in terms of width and height, so 34 width and 30 inches height.
That's 2 things I thought of that without visiting the field, you don't get to really experience, but I can explain now is some of these varieties, like Russ just said, we have some of them we have 1 plant, and some of them we have 30 plants. And then there's some where we have a few, 5 or 10 or so, some number in between. So, that kind of impacted a little bit of the ability to evaluate, because in the case where we had a row of 30, we had 30 plants to go select like 5 average plants from. But like for this one, for example, if we only had 4 plants, we had to collect data on those 4 plants, even if one of them looked horrible, and took the average down for the rest, or something. We tried to avoid that, obviously, because we don't want to skew the data. But anyway, and then the other thing to mention is I think a lot of the plants, started to look better once we got rid of the guinea grass in our field. So I think that was having a negative impact on the plants. So we got rid of the guinea grass and established a different grass in the
So you
rows.
can see that guinea grass there, all up in there.
Yeah, and if you guys are on, I'm not sure if it matters what island you're on. If you're at a low elevation, you're probably dealing with some type of guinea grass or other invasive, just aggressive invasive grass. So that's just, I guess, something to keep in mind. We were mowing constantly, and you can see in this photo all that mulch and just kind of dry matter at the base there by the irrigation tubing. We'd have to mow and then go in and leaf blow it all away to keep it away from the base of the plant. A lot of maintenance, and I just, in general, not my favorite ground cover to combine with these, because I feel like they started to look a little bit better once we got it.
So Jamie, we got a question. What are buyers looking for when it comes to flower appearance in your mind? And then also, what's average stem length for saleable flowers, and what do you do with shorter lengths?
I wish I could answer the first one. I don't know. I have the exact same question. It's not dumb. I have no idea. When the people that we talked to be honest, they were just excited that we had Protea growing on Oahu. So they didn't really specify. I did talk to a couple of different like floral artists, and their requests tended to be specific to color types. So I don't know that they never said I want at least 16-inch stems or something like that. They just said, I want something orange or peach or red or, whatever. So I think it really depends on your buyer. Like whatever your buyer wants, that's what you should grow. So that's not a very good answer. And there are probably people on the call who have been doing this for many, many years and can answer that better than I can. So I'll leave it at that.
I encourage, if you're a florist, to just type in the chat what you're looking for. I do
Tell
know
us.
that shorter stems, people have sold them to restaurants, for example, and they'll use them in the small vases. And then people also will buy them for leis, because they'll just pop the stems they'll pop the flower off the stem and they'll just throw them onto a lei. Or if they're using it for like a lei po'o or something like that, shorter stem would be useful. So you could market it. But I think in general, if you're going for a wholesale perspective, you're going to look for a little bit of length, more than 10, 12 inches stem.
And we did all of the above. We sold to people who were making lei. We sold to one of our buyers that we did small bouquets, but because of the way they had to pack it and move it around the island, we had to cut them shorter. So that worked out in the case that we had a few varieties that I loved that just I couldn't get really, really long stems on. So we'd cut those and this is a question I don't have the answer to. When you say stem length, are you including the flower head, or are you just talking about the flower stem? Do you know the answer to that, Russ?
Sorry,
stem length?
I was looking in the chat for
Oh, that's okay.
said that.
When you're talking about stem length, is it just the length of the actual stem, or are you including the flower head?
That I don't know. Yeah, that
Okay,
I'm
me
not
either.
sure at.
I thought it was, I interpreted it as just the stem. So I got at least 12-inch stems for that particular buyer. But anytime they went to anyone else, I cut them as long as I could, and I tried to get them closer to like 14 to maybe 16, and on a good day with good plants.
Pedro brings up a good point in the chat that they're also looking for a specific stage of the flower in which the stamens are almost not even opened or just opening a little bit, which Jamie talks about in the field day video about when she harvests what she thinks is desirable in terms of the flower life. Yeah. And including the flower for the stem length.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, that's good to know then. I thought I had really short flowers, but if they included the flower head, then that they weren't actually all that short. That's good.
So yeah, we'll keep going because we're almost at time. So I want to give us enough. We got the rest of 576 and then just 2 varieties more. So hang tight, folks. I'll rush just a little bit. Nothing extraordinary in terms of health or average width and average height, around the average size for most of the varieties, right at 34 inches width, 30 inches height. The same sort of health trends that we've seen in most of the varieties. Not a great yielder in terms of flower count for the actually 4 plants. So that shouldn't be 5 plants. That might be a little bit of a decrease because we only counted from 4 plants for this variety, but still not that high in terms of flower count. Now, the last 2 we're going to look at are named varieties. So we got Hybrid 74, which is Brandy Dela Cruz. We kind of threw this one and Jacqueline Louise into the trial to see how they did and to compare the other varieties against them to see whether or not these stacked up against known varieties that could do well at low elevation. So here's Brandy Dela Cruz. Yeah, do you have anything quick to say about it there?
Yeah, just briefly, like I agree with what Ken said. If you can grow this one, grow this one. It seems to grow everywhere. It doesn't seem to be having some of the the nutritional issues that we're seeing in some of the other plants. Fungal issues, like just overall, it's a very healthy plant. Long straight stems, beautiful flowers. I harvested probably the most of my yield came from a few varieties, and this was one of them. So prolific producer. Yeah, it's a great flower.
One thing to note is that in the propagation portion of this, I didn't have a lot of success with 74. I think it was below 30% success in terms of propagation. So we're not getting a lot of these plants from propagation from the cuttings that we took, unfortunately. So yeah, here's what Jamie was saying a little bit. The average health didn't see as much of a dip. We were at a little bit higher health throughout the period after we got through that initial phase, and just over an average amount of width and height, right? So you're saying that you saw a lot of yield from this plant from harvestable stems, right, Jamie? So this isn't necessarily indicative of what you're actually going to get from a harvest perspective, even though we're not seeing 400 flowers or 300 something flowers from these 5 plants. More of them were harvestable, right, in your mind?
Yeah, exactly. Some of those other ones that had a really high number of flowers, the stems are really short. So those might be good if you were just harvesting the flower itself and just selling that. But if you were going for stems and harvestable flowers, this had probably more than any other variety. Maybe close. I would say close contenders would be maybe the 88 and the 620 or 626.
Now the final variety, 88, or the name variety Jacqueline Louise. You can see the nice yellow flowers here, and I'll let Jamie just give a brief.
Oh, yeah, sure. I love these. They are not looking good right now at all.
Oh.
So these ones look almost equal to those other ones that I love. The flower that's small and compact and pretty. That I think is 583. I'm gonna say. This one grows all on the ground. It's very floppy, but I have done a little bit of pruning, and we're going into the 3rd year now, and it's doing exactly what Ken said. It looks like it grows on the ground and then it starts to go up. And it's doing that now. It's starting to go up. So just with this really quick, since we're wrapping up too, I know a lot of the people on the call are on neighbor islands, but if you guys find yourselves on Oahu and you want to come look at these, please reach out and contact me and come out. I'd love to have you guys to the farm. There's nothing like seeing it in person. It's cool to look at the pictures and stuff, but it's so awesome to be in the field. So you guys are more than welcome. I'm happy to share everything that I've learned and hopefully learn from some of you guys as well.
Great. So yeah, you can see there that the height didn't get too tall. It's just over that height for just slightly taller on average than 6'3", and a little bit less wide in terms of average width. And you can kind of see that we had some issues with health in the beginning, but did start to improve in terms of health throughout the trial. I thought that this was a sporadic flowering plant. I didn't see as many flowers on this compared to others, and you can kind of see that here with the total number of flowers and with the sporadic flowering throughout the data collection period, right? And that's that. So we can open up unless Jamie has something else she wanted to comment on, final comments to questions.
I think I sort of said my final comments now. Just if you guys want to come visit, come see me. I'm happy to show you around.
Yeah, and thanks to HCOA for the specialty crop block grant. We really appreciated the opportunity to work on this. Yeah. All righty, folks, take care.
Good night.
Good night.